All right. I want to say thank you for deciding to come back out here after this morning. It is good to see you again, and I am glad to be here. I, again, appreciate Brother John and Brother Keith for bringing me out and letting me talk to you about these important topics that we're addressing as we talk about the idea of moving the church forward. You know, this morning we talked about the idea that we are either striving or we're drifting. It's one of those two options. That's really the way it works when it comes to the Christian faith. And we talked a little bit about the idea that if we're striving, it's not going to be an easy process. Striving means we're going to have to work at it. It's going to be kind of tough. There's going to be some things that we're going to have to do that maybe we don't necessarily like to do or want to do. But there are going to be some things that we need to do. This evening, I want to kind of move on and branch on and build up to some ideas that are based on that previous idea from the lesson this morning. And I want us to talk about the idea of moving the church forward by getting out of our comfort zone. Now, you may or may not know this, but that phrase, comfort zone, was actually coined by a lady named Judith Bardwick. She was a managerial kind of writer, thinker, if you will. And in 1991, she wrote her work, Danger in the Comfort Zone. And that from that point on, this idea of leaving our comfort zone has become embedded in our cultural vernacular. We use this phrase a lot. We talk about it very, very commonly. And in this work, how she defines comfort zone is this. She says, the comfort zone is a behavioral state within which a person operates in an anxiety-neutral condition, using a limited set of behaviors to deliver a steady level of performance, usually without a sense of risk. Now, that's very technical, okay? So, what does all that mean? Well, what that means is this. In our comfort zone, we operate in our daily routines and we don't feel any risk. We don't have any anxiety with what we're doing because we're comfortable with it. Now, we might be sitting there going, what's wrong with that? I like to be comfortable, right? As Americans, we like to be comfortable. How many of you like to go sit on a plain wooden pew versus the cushioned ones that you're on now? Yeah, we prefer the cushion, flat out, right? If they had couches in here, we might even like that better, but we would all fall asleep, and so we're not going to do that, right? Because why? We would be too comfortable. Okay? We like comfort. How many of you guys actually get up every morning and say, I'm going to do the things that make me uncomfortable today? Nobody. We get up, and if we're a coffee drinker, we say, I'm going to have me a cup of coffee. Why? Because it's comfortable. It feels good. That's what I like. That's what I do. And we like comfort. But the problem with the comfort zone is, as she says, in this, there's no risk, right? There's no risk. In other words, there's not much incentive to reach a new level, a new height in what we're doing. We're plateaued. It's the same. We stay there, right? And the simple truth is, that's not life. Life is full of opportunities to grow and to do new things and to try new things and have new experiences, but all of those exist outside of our comfort zone, right? Now, if we know this, why do we not do it? You see, most of the time when it comes to stepping outside of our comfort zones, it's not because we don't know what else is out there. We know what's out there. Instead, what it is a lot of times what holds us back is our frame of mind. Our mindset is what holds us back, not a lack of knowledge. You see, because when we step out of the comfort zone, we step into the fear zone. I don't know what's coming. We say, I can't control this. Well, let me tell you something. Control is an illusion anyway. You think you're in charge, but you're not. The person in charge, his name is God. It's not whatever your name is, okay? You can fill in the blank with whatever name you choose. If it's not God, you're not in control. Just so you know, I'm going to kill that sacred cow right now, okay? Go have some steak for dinner, because that's dead, right? And so here's the idea. We need to learn to embrace the idea that we're not in control. And that just because I'm comfortable with it does not mean that that's what God wants me to be doing. Right? I want us to talk a little bit about this idea of comfort zone so we understand this. As we've already kind of talked about, our comfort zone is where we feel comfortable. It has boundaries, right? Whenever we cross one of those boundaries, we, quote, feel uncomfortable. Right? The easiest way to think about this is every person has a personal space bubble, right? Okay? If somebody comes and they stand with their face right here, I don't know about you, but I'm be like, take a step back. There's a zone, right? You have made me uncomfortable. Okay? And some people, their zones are like right here and it doesn't matter. And some people's zones is like, hey, you came within my 5 feet boundary. You better stay back, right? Okay? But here's the idea. Comfort zones are different. Right? That's the idea. Comfort zones are different. And so one of the things that we need to learn to process through is that just because I have a comfort zone, that doesn't mean that what I deem good or bad is what God approves or disapproves. Because sometimes I think we get those two things mixed up. If I like it, then obviously God likes it. And if I don't like it, well, then obviously God doesn't like it, right? Unfortunately, that's not the way they work. Comfort zones protect our personal comfort, right? This is the chart that you'll find if you look at that book. This is the chart that she came up with. And the thing about comfort zones is that they vary radically. What's comfortable for me might be uncomfortable for you, and that might be radically different from the person who's sitting right next to you. Okay, so comfort zones, we need to recognize they change from person to person. And one of the things about this is that since my personal comfort zone protects my personal comforts, my preferences, I need to really evaluate whether or not that's the right comfort zone to have. Because here's the truth. Can a comfort zone that protects my personal preferences include things that are ungodly? Let me tell you, if you had met me before I became a Christian, my comfort zone would make you highly uncomfortable. The way I spoke and the way I did things, I was very comfortable with it. But God would not have been so comfortable with it, right? At the same time, can our comfort zone exclude things that are godly? I want you to think about that. If I'm living my life by my personal comfort zone might exclude some things that are godly behaviors. Okay? For example, whenever I gave my first sermon, okay, I have been a Christian less than a year. And I gave my first sermon, and it was done in about 15 minutes. And all y'all are like, dude, go back to that, please, okay? Yeah, I know how it goes. All right. But here's the thing. I was so scared. I was talking about, I was just, right? I'm way outside of my comfort zone. Like when you're looking up that and you talk about the panic zone, which is where it goes to, that's about where I was. I was like, whoa, what's going on? Right? And so that was something that I wasn't comfortable with, but that doesn't mean it's wrong. Just because we're not comfortable with something doesn't mean that it's evil. It doesn't make it ungodly, right? And this is something that's important for us as Christians to latch onto, because I think this is one of the tools that Satan uses today a lot. He takes some ungodly behaviors, and if he can get us to be comfortable with those, then he's got us. Or on the other side, if it's a godly behavior and if Satan can get us to be uncomfortable with that, then we close our hearts to God when God calls us to walk in that area. And He's got us. You see, we need to be careful with this idea of comfort zones. Because the simple truth is, when you look at it, many disagreements and divisions in Christ's body are a result of what I'm going to term a theology of personal comfort zones. Right? What happens in this is we assume that my comfort zone is God's comfort zone. Right? And so if I don't like it, then God obviously can't like it because it's uncomfortable. It's not good because I don't like it. On the other hand, if I do like it, well, then obviously this is a God-ordained and sanctioned thing, and everybody should like it just like I do. Right? And so what happens then is I take my comfort zone and I say, this is God's truth, and I say, you must live by my comfort zone. Or you take your comfort zone and you say, no, this is God's truth. Now you must live by this comfort zone. And what happens when those two things don't mesh up? What happens when they collide? Now we have a problem, right? And that's exactly the same concept that you see the Apostle Paul addressing in the early church. If you look at Romans chapter 14, 1 Corinthians chapter 8, that's the same idea. There were some things that were allowed because different people were comfortable with different things. And he says, look, if you're not comfortable with it, you don't get to pass judgment on those who are. And if you are comfortable with it, you don't get to pass judgment on those who aren't. Your comfort zone does not determine God's standard. Right? Go back and read those chapters. You'll see what I'm talking about. And so we need to learn to be careful because no one's comfort zone dictates God's method or comfort level. Let me illustrate it biblically. All right? Let me ask you this. How many of you guys would demand that your preacher go marry a prostitute and live with her, even though she was unfaithful to him many times, to be a living parable to you? You be comfortable with that? Have you read the book of Hosea? That was obviously within God's comfort zone. What about this one? How many of you parents would allow a group of people to unjustly murder your child because they didn't like what they said and how they lived? You be comfortable with that? And yet, what happened in the life of Jesus Christ? You see, our comfort zones aren't always God's comfort zones. God does some things that we would go, I don't know. I don't know if I can go there. Right? And just because we're uncomfortable with something does not necessarily mean that God is uncomfortable with it. And one of the neat passages that I want us to look at, if you brought your Bibles, open them up to Acts chapter 10. And we're going to look at the Apostle Peter. Peter ran into this same concept. He ran into this idea of comfort zones. In Acts chapter 10, I want us to begin reading in verse 9. It says, the next day as they were on their journey and approaching the city, okay? So Peter has this vision. Cornelius has seen a man. Let me give you the context here. Cornelius has seen a vision of an angel who said, send to Joppa to get Peter. And so he sends some men out. And so now we're in this next text, okay? It says, the next day as they're on their journey and approaching the city, Peter went up on the housetop about the 6th hour to pray. And he became hungry and wanted something to eat. But while they were preparing it, he fell into a trance and saw the heavens opened, and something like a great sheet descending, being let down by its four corners upon the earth. In it were all kinds of animals and reptiles and birds of the air. And there came a voice to him, rise, Peter, kill and eat. But Peter said, by no means. Lord, I have never eaten anything that is common or unclean. And the voice came to him a second time. What God has made clean, do not call common. This happened 3 times, and then the thing was taken up at once into heaven. Now, while Peter was inwardly perplexed as to what the vision he had seen might mean, behold, the men who were sent by Cornelius, having made inquiry for Simon's house, stood at the gate. And they called out to ask whether Simon, who was called Peter, was lodging there. And while Peter was pondering the vision, the Spirit said to him, behold, 3 men are looking for you. Rise and go down and accompany them without hesitation, for I have sent them. And Peter went down to the men and said, I am the one you are looking for. What is the reason for your coming? And they said, Cornelius, a centurion, an upright and God-fearing man, who is well spoken of by the whole Jewish nation, was directed by a holy angel to send for you to come to his house and to hear what you have to say. So he invited them in to be his guests. All right, I want to pause right here real quick and talk about some of this. What's going on? Let's get some cultural context into what we just read, right? Peter is a Jew. And up until this point, brethren, the church has been Jewish. I don't know if we've ever caught that before. But the church has been Jewish. And Peter is living out his Christian faith with his Jewish cultural context, right? And what does that mean, right? It means that he never violated the Jewish dietary code. It was unclean, he didn't eat it. Why? Because that's the way he was raised. That's what he was comfortable with. Right? Could he have? Well, obviously, based on what God's vision was, yes. But did he? No. Why? Because that was outside of his comfort zone. Right? You all see that? It also means that he didn't associate with Gentiles. Right? The Jewish people did not associate with the Gentiles. They were considered unclean. If you went to their house, you were then unclean. So you just didn't go there. That's not what Jews did. That's not what a good Jewish person would do then. Now, does it really make you unclean to go into somebody else's house that's not a Jew? Well, based on the vision that God said, what I have called clean, you don't call common. No. But up until this point in time, that thought would have never entered Peter's mind. Why? Because he was operating within his comfort zone. This is what God expects. This is how Jewish people are to be. Right? Now, it's easy for us today to sit here and judge Peter because of his Jewishness. Oh, well, Peter should have known better. That's not the way that... It's easy when you're sitting on the other 2,000 years on the other side of this event to look back and go, oh, well, you should have known better. But you got to think about it. The Jews have been God's chosen people since Abraham all the way down to Peter. And the way it was done was, hey, you don't eat unclean foods and you don't associate with the Gentiles. That's not what we do. We're holy, we're separate, we don't do what they do. Right? And so we don't need to judge Peter for being Jewish, for operating within his comfort zone. Now, what's interesting about this is that just because Peter was operating in that comfort zone, it did not refute his faith in Christ until we get to Acts chapter 10. But in Acts chapter 10, God calls Peter out of his comfort zone. He says, okay, let me show you what I'm doing here. Here's this vision. Here's these unclean animals. Did God know Peter had never eaten an unclean animal? Yes, he did. Why do you think he showed him only the unclean animals? If there had been one clean animal in that sheet, you know what Peter would have done? He would have got up and went after it. But he didn't. Why? Because there were only unclean animals there. And here's the idea. God said, your comfort zone is wrong. Your comfort zone goes against my plan. And what I expect you to do, Peter, is I expect you to change your comfort zone. I expect you to step out of that comfort zone. Right? And I think the same thing is true for us. When we're talking about our comfort zones, what we are comfortable with, God is fine with that, and fine with us until our comfort zone conflicts with His plan for us. And then God says, you know what? Your comfort zone doesn't get to count. Step on out. I got plans for you. I got some work for you to do. And that's something that we need to really recognize, learn to recognize, right? And Peter's going to go with them. We're going to see this here in just a little bit. But we also need to recognize a few other things. When Peter went with them and did this for God, it cost him something. If you go on past Acts chapter 10, you get to Acts chapter 11, verses 1 through 3, the rest of the Jewish Christians were not happy with Peter. How dare you go to those unclean Gentiles' houses? You're unclean. You ate with unclean people. How can you do that and consider yourself a good Jewish Christian? That's pretty much the idea that was given to Peter in Acts chapter 11, right? But it didn't matter if they were uncomfortable with it. It didn't matter to God if Peter was uncomfortable with it. It didn't matter to God that the other Jewish Christians were uncomfortable with it, because God's purpose was bigger than their comfort zone. God had a plan for the church to extend past the Jewish people. And he wasn't going to let their comfort zone stand in his way. Now, I don't know about you, but I, for one, am very grateful to Peter. I'm not a Jewish person. I don't have any Jewish blood in my background that I am aware of. And when I think about this idea, I wonder what would happen if Peter had told God, I can't do that. That makes me too uncomfortable. I mean, I don't know about you. Maybe you've got some Jewish in your background. But if not, you're a Gentile. And God's plan was for Peter to step out of his comfort zone so that you and I could become a part of his body. And that's something we need to think about. Because I think sometimes God calls us out of our comfort zones. Look at this. Look, I love this part when we go down through here. Peter was so hanging on to his Jewish ways. He says, and he said that he goes with them and he arrives there. And then beginning in verse 28, I'm going to start reading there. He says, he said to them, you yourselves know how unlawful it is for a Jew to associate with or to visit anyone of another nation. But God has shown me that I should not call any person common or unclean. So when I was sent for, I came without objection. I asked then why you sent for me. I want us to think about what Peter just did here. I mean, we've got his family, we've got all of this tradition, everything that Peter's ever known. And God said, I want you to throw that down and to do what I've called you to do. And so he does. Now listen, I'm here to tell you, if you've never done that, that is not an easy thing to do. If you've never had to lay down what you thought was your comfort zone, the things that have been handed to you from your family or from your friends, and put those down and step outside of that to follow God's will, you are missing how hard that is to do. Okay? And so here's the idea, here's the question I want us to think about. What does that mean for us? Right? What does all of this mean for us? And let me tell you, I think our challenge is this. We need to seek God's comfort zone and not assume that my comfort zone is God's comfort zone, right? Okay? If we find ourselves assuming I don't like it, therefore God can't like it, brethren, I wanted to ask you to stop. Just stop that thought process right there and reevaluate and go, is this really something that God doesn't like? That God finds not okay? Or is this simply something that I don't like? Something that makes me uncomfortable, right? And how do we do that? Because that's a hard thing to do. So how do we do that? First, a couple things I want us to kind of talk about, all right? First, we need to realize that we cannot allow our comfort zone to restrict God's work, okay? We have to get that thought into our minds, right? When you study the scriptures, one of the interesting things about this, how many times does God go to those people who are already ready for the task and say, I want you to do this? Go ahead, go through the Bible, find me one. God doesn't do that. One What you see over and over and over again is God goes to some people and they say, me? Oh, wait a minute, God. I'm not the guy you're looking for. That's not in my comfort zone, right? I mean, think about it. Moses, Gideon, Peter, right here. They're all saying, whoa, wait. You see, here's something we have to grasp onto, brother. God doesn't call the equipped. God equips the called. And you and I, we've been called. God has called us out of darkness into His marvelous light, into the kingdom of His Son. We've been called. Will we allow ourselves to be equipped by God? Will we follow trusting in Him, having faith, showing that faith to those who are around us? Or will we continue to sit where we're comfortable? That's our challenge. You see, it's important for us to realize that if we want to get into that growth zone, we're going to have to step out of the comfort zone. And we're going to have to push past that fear zone that says, oh, what will people think? Or I don't think I can do this. We're going to have to push past all of that so that God can have us do the work that He has called us to do, so that He can equip us to do the work He's called us to do. Right? And see, here's the part that we don't like. When we step out of that comfort zone, we hit that fear barrier. And it's only when we can push through that fear that we're going to find ourselves in the area where we can be stretched and grown. Right? And we have to operate in those zones. If we really want to move the church forward, we have to get out of our comfort zones. We have to push through the fear and follow God into those areas where we might be stretched so that we can grow. That's how this works, right? And the second thing that we need to do is we need to allow God to change us so that our comfort zone aligns with His comfort zone, right? It's not the other way around. We don't get to tell God what His comfort zone should be. God is the standard. So if His comfort zone is different than ours, we need to be the ones doing the changing. We don't need to expect God to come to us. We need to go to Him. And that's one of the things I want us to really strive for. We need to try to be those kinds of people where our comfort zone includes the things that God's comfort zone includes, and it excludes the things that God's excludes. Now, that's not easy. And it's not always a fun process to get there. I'm just going to tell you straight up. It's not fun sometimes. But here's the idea. How do we make sure we're having that mindset? We need to be asking this question. The question should never be, am I comfortable? That's not the question we should be asking. The question we need to be asking is, am I growing into the image of Christ? That's the question that will always drive us forward out of our comfort zones, past our fears, into the place where God can use us. Am I growing into the image of Christ? Here's a little truth for you. Spiritual growth always violates comfort zones. I'm just going to tell you. When God is stretching you and growing you, you're not going to be comfortable. It just doesn't work that way. Right? And here's the other side to that. When you study the Scriptures, one of the other truths that you'll notice is that it's evil that places a premium on comfort, not godliness. Let that thought sink in. In the Scriptures, it's evil that places a premium on comfort, not godliness. So where are we placing our premium on? Where do we want to put our emphasis? I want you to think about it this way. I remember laying awake at night sometimes when I was a little boy, and my legs would be hurting so bad. They call it growing pains, right? How many of you had kids or, walked in there, they're laying in bed, they're rubbing their legs, they might even be crying, it hurts so bad it woke them up or whatever, right? I remember doing that, and my mom would come in, and I would tell her what was going on, and she'd say, oh, son, it's growing pains. Well, now listen, as a 10-year-old boy, you know what I thought? I thought, man, my bones are going to be like huge, right? I thought my bones were growing, but that's not really how that works, okay? Growing pains really are the idea of you've used your muscle in a way that it hasn't been used to being used before. You've stretched it, you've grown it in a way that is not what it's accustomed to. And that's why you have that pain. Well, guess what? Let's transfer that to the spiritual realm. When is the last time, brethren, you had some spiritual growing pains? Ask yourself that question. When is the last time that I was stretched and grown by what I did for God? That I was uncomfortable? You see, many times we don't like to go there. We like to sit where it feels good. And if it stretches too much, if it's something that we haven't done before, using ourselves in a way we haven't been allowed God to use us before, we're like, no, thank you. We don't want that. Right? How do we know when we're doing that? Well, there's a few things that we say when we're in this area, when we're resisting God's growth of us. We say, oh, that's uncomfortable. Oh, that's scary. Oh, that might be too hard for me. I've never done that before. When we find ourselves saying those kinds of things, we're trying to stay in our comfort zone. And that fear barrier is pushing us back in. Right? And the truth is this, just like as you use your muscles, that's what makes you stronger as you grow as a child. Brethren, we're not going to grow as a church unless we're willing to step outside of our comfort zone, be used in ways that we haven't been used before so that we can be stretched and grown. That's the way it works. And I get that this is not easy. And I want us to understand that this doesn't happen in a linear fashion. Right? You're not always going to be on a constant path of growth, right? There's going to be some peaks and troughs, and you're going to have some times when you're going to grow exponentially, and you're going to have some times when you're going, am I growing at all? Right? Okay. And I understand that. But the idea is not whether or not we're growing at this super fast rate or this super slow rate. The idea is that we're growing, that we're allowing God to stretch us and use us. That we're doing some things that we haven't done before, right? And I think we need to learn to appreciate that process, because when I feel uncomfortable, if I don't appreciate this process, my instinct is to go back to where I do feel comfortable. But if I understand what God is doing, then I can embrace that discomfort and allow God to use me in a way that He hasn't been able to before. And I will grow into the image and the likeness of Jesus Christ more and more. That's how it works, right? I want you to think about Peter. Peter was in his Jewish comfort zone. God gave him this vision 3 times. Same thing. And when Peter still gets to the house, he says, you know I really shouldn't be here. What do you want from me? Really, Peter? And yet, how many times is that us? How many times has the preacher preached a sermon and we go, whoo, I don't know, man, that's kind of tough. How many times have the elders ask you to do something or call for you to serve in a certain way, and you go, that's not really my talents? You see, it's easy for us to look back and judge somebody else. But when we have to look in the mirror, it's a little bit harder to have that same standard. And I get it. See, the thing about it is when we're in the comfort zone, it's tempting because we feel safe. We feel in control, right? That the environment's all on this even keel, this smooth sailing, so to speak. But here's the problem. The best sailors aren't born on smooth waters. right? I mean, I'm going to be honest with you. If you're going to take me out sailing, I don't want to hear about all the great times when it was smooth water. I want to know that if the water gets choppy and the storm comes up, you're going to get me home. And sometimes I think that's what the people out there want to know too. When we go out there and we want to talk to them about God and about why they should live this Christian life, we're too afraid to show them what it's really like. We're afraid to show them our struggles. We're afraid to show them and be authentic about who we are and some of the things that we've gone through. Oh, I don't know, man, that's just too scary. But if I'm out there and I don't know God, and I'm struggling, and you've had that same struggle, and God brought you through, do you think I might be more inclined to listen to you? Here's the idea. I want us to really do some evaluation as I close this evening. Let's ask, when is the last time I did something that got me out of my comfort zone? We'll start with some of the easy things, okay? Let me ask you this. Are you content doing the same things you've always done in the same way you've always done them? And before you say no, because that's our automatic reaction, what about this? When is the last time you learned a new worship song? Well, what do I need to do that for? The old ones are just as fine as good work, just as well as the new ones. That's not the point. I'm not asking for justification. Right? When is the last time that you, pardon me for saying that, you sat in a different pew? What do you mean? My name's carved right there, don't you see? Right? Right? When is the last time that you talked to a brother or sister about spiritual things instead of hunting or fishing or the weather or shopping or crafting? Right? When is the last time you went to the hospital to visit somebody? Well, now, wait a minute. Isn't that the preacher's? No, it's not the preacher's job. You will not find that verse in the Bible, just so you know. You see what I'm saying? And now, that's the easy stuff. Let's take it up a notch, right? When is the last time that you talked to your neighbor about Jesus Christ? Do we all know we need to? Oh, yeah. We all know. Why don't we? Are we in our comfort zone when we don't? When is the last time that you intentionally put yourself in a situation to minister to those who are lost? When is the last time that you led a personal Bible study? When is the last time you were even going to teach Bible class? Not to the unbelievers, but to the believers. You see, I think a lot of times we sit in our comfort zones, brethren. We really do. Let me ask it this way. Have there been opportunities for you to step outside of your comfort zone, but you said things like, wait, that's not my talent. You said, well, I'm not as good as Sister so-and-so, so, I'm going to let them do it. She has that ministry already going. I've never done anything like that. I don't think I would even know where to start. Because nobody's ever done anything new, right? Here's the idea. Brethren, we need to remember that it's when we take on challenges that lie somewhere in between these boundaries of what I'm comfortable with to what causes me to panic and shut down. When we operate in that zone, right, that's when we stretch and grow, right? I found this quote as I was getting this lesson ready, and I really loved it. I just want you to think about what it says. It says, great things never came from comfort zones. I want you to think about that. Great things never came from comfort zones. Why? Because if you're in the comfort zone, you're doing what you've always done in the same way you've always done it. And so nothing changes. Do you want to do something great for God? you have to get out of your comfort zone. It's not an option. If we really want to move the church forward, we have to practice getting out of our comfort zone so that we can do great things for our God. Now, my question for you is, are you willing to do this? Are you willing to get out of your comfort zone? Right? I'm going to give you, if you say that you are, and I pray that's where your heart is, right? If you say that you are, here's something you do. I want you first to find something that is just a little out of your comfort zone, okay? We're not talking go all the way to the edge. Just find something that's a little out of your comfort zone. And then I want you to do it. But not just once, right? Because here's what we do when we just do this once. We go, oh, I tried. I failed. I'm not going to do that anymore. No, don't do it just once. I want you to find that thing that's just that little part outside of your comfort zone. I want you to do it 5 times. Yes, I said 5. And then once you've done that, then I want you to go back and look at it and go, is this as scary and as hard as I first thought it was? Because I'm going to guarantee you the answer is going to be no. Will it be easy? Maybe not. Most of the time, I don't master something when I've only done it 5 times. I don't know about you. You might be a lot better than me. But by the 5th time, when I look back at that first time, it was easier. I had stretched and I had grown. And my guess is you will too. We can do this. We can get outside of our comfort zones and serve our God. And so I want to challenge you tonight. If you have been allowing your comfort zone to dictate how you serve your God, change that. Follow what God is calling you to do instead of what you're comfortable doing already. Let's move the church forward. And that starts with us allowing God to change our hearts so that He can change our lives as He calls us from our comfort zone into His. So if you're here this evening and you realize you need to make a change, that you need to quit telling God no because of your comfort zone, we want to help you do that. We want to pray for you. We want to lift you up as you pursue God and serving our God. If you have a need, I encourage you to please come as we stand and as we sing.